Political science, what we talk about in D.C. is dramatically different than what we were talking about even a year ago. Hey, you think about last summer, you had Paul Krugman, the New York Times, making the case, say we need to do another $1 trillion jobs bill, another stimulus. And, you just intuitively figured out that if more government and more spending was the answer, then where are the jobs? That stimulus bill was supposed to keep unemployment below 8%. And as we know, that unemployment figure went close to 10%. And, we're in a situation today because of that historic election that the whole agenda that's being discussed is now reflective of what the American people want to hear. And we're at one of those moments. We're convened on a day today. It's one of those critical, pivotal moments in our country's history when we have to address a fundamental problem that faces us. No doubt you're all tracking. This is the debt ceiling discussions that are going on. And I would tell you, this has been going hot and heavy now for a period of time, and it's going to culminate over the next week. And what I want to do is explain to you, I'm glad the Speaker allowed us, to each of us, to go back to our districts this weekend. And I will tell you, it was the right decision. It was the right decision because we've already passed a bill in the House of Representatives that averts the crisis. I'm going to tell you about that bill here in a second. But I think the Speaker was wise, recognizing the fact that we have passed a bill that solves the problem, that we would be able to come home here and to explain it. I have 6 events that that I'm going to do over these 48 hours where I can have an opportunity to explain to you what the situation is and how we see this going forward, so that you can communicate to your family and friends on where we're at. So let me define what the issue is right here, just for clarity. The situation that we're facing, we have a $14.29 trillion debt in our country. And we have reached the legal limit where if the country is going to continue to borrow, there's going to have to be legislation that authorizes that. And the President has submitted such a request to the people's representatives. He said, we want to raise the debt ceiling. Now look, you look at the folks that rate our credit rating, right? The Moody's and the Standard & Poor's. And they have been very clear in communicating to us. They have said that if you don't address this situation in a fundamental way, you're going to have your credit rating downgraded. Now, that downgrade could come in one of 2 ways. The first is if we default. If we default either on our bonds or if we default on our bills, we're looking at the prospect of a downgrade. Now, Standard & Poor's has went even a step further. Standard & Poor's has said if you go into prioritization, we're going to downgrade your credit rating. Prioritization means you're not paying all your bills. That's one part of the crisis. And to alter the structure, you're going to get downgraded. That's why, if any of you saw me on the news last night, this is what I'm communicating, is that it's not enough to focus in on the debt ceiling figure itself. There were 100 Democrats that voted for a bill that would have raised the debt ceiling with no cuts. I voted no on that. I just want you to know that the reason why, I understand the crisis. I understand what it means if we end up defaulting. But if we end up raising that debt ceiling without structural changes, we're going to get downgraded. What the downgrade to our credit rating means is that our interest rates would then rise. If our interest rates rise, that means the price of money for our small businesses, and we have many small business owners here, they're going to have to pay more to borrow. And when they have to pay more to borrow, that means their profitability is going to shrink. When their profitability shrinks, that means they're going to have to do things that are not good for us. One is they may have to let more people go. And when unemployment rises, that means we're going to have to pay more in unemployment insurance. And we pay for more in unemployment insurance, that hurts the deficit. That also means families are going without jobs. And that also means we're not gaining revenues. We're not gaining revenues in because we got more people that are laid off. That's just the business side of it. If interest rates rise, it's going to cascade all throughout American life. That means your mortgages, for those that look to buy a home, and you know how much our economy is tied to the sales of homes. So what I'm communicating to you today is we're in a very serious situation. And my experience has been in combat that when you're in a moment like this, you need to think very clear-headed. You need to think through the first, second, and third order effect. You need to decide on the course of action. And then you need to have the resolve to go forward. That's why what I want to tell you is I believe in our plan. Our plan is cut, cap, and balance. I want to explain that to you just for a few minutes here. The cut, cap, and balance, I believe, addresses both dimensions of the crisis. The cut, cap, and balance, recognizing the need to not default. After we take responsible measures, it raises the debt ceiling. The second thing it does is that it actually does the meaningful reforms that will avoid the downgrade, which will allow us then to keep the interest rates where they're at so that we can work our way out of this recession. Let's talk about cut. What we do immediately with cut, cap, and balance is there is a $111 billion in the coming year that's cut from the budget. Now, look, I will tell you that is a good judgment. That is something that we can manage. We can cut. It is going to cause us to tighten our belt. This is about a 20% tightening of the belt across your federal agencies, but it's necessary to do. It rolls back spending to 2008 levels. Now, our opposition is trying to portray that is reckless and unnecessary. It's neither. It's necessary and it's not reckless. If you think about where we were spending in 2008 levels. Look, I mean, there was a lot of government spending that was going on in 2008. We can survive on the 2008 spending levels. So that level of cut is important because it signals right away to our creditors that we are going to get this under control. But the cut for 2012 is only the first step. The second piece of this, the cap, I would argue that the cap is more important than anything else. The cap, what the cap does is it looks out over the next decade, and it basically says that we are going to pay federal spending on a percentage of what the economy is, the size of the economy as measured by the gross domestic product, the GDP. Now, economists, regardless of party, will tell you that a disciplined level of spending should not exceed 20%. You shouldn't spend more than 20% of the entire economy on federal spending. Right now, we're spending over 24% on federal spending in relation to GDP. This is unsustainable, and it's ill-disciplined, and it needs to change. And that's why, some will say, well, why don't you tax the rich? Tax the rich. Look, I think many of you know, I come from a working class family. I mean, there are folks that have known me just about all my life. They know I didn't come from a lot of money. And when you go on the internet, you can see that our family doesn't have a lot of money. And that's fine for us. We're very focused on service and making a difference. But look, here are the facts. Right now, the top 1% pay 38% of our total tax. The top 10% pay 70% of our total tax. Now, I bring that up because when this argument is brought to the fore, it's almost as if the rich aren't paying right now. They're paying 70% of our total tax. And let's remember that these are the folks that create the jobs for us, right? So when you talk about tax the rich, let's recognize the fact that what we have right now is a spending problem. We're spending 24 cents of our entire, out of every dollar on federal spending. And economists will tell you that's ill-disciplined. We need to get that spending below 20%. Now look, if we get our spending under control, if our spending goes to 19% and we're still having trouble balancing the budget, then I think everything needs to be put up on the table now. And if we have to raise some taxes, we're going to have to take a look at that. But if you raise taxes right now, all we're going to end up doing is spending it. Because there is a trajectory. Those who've studied this, we have a trajectory of debt that goes like this. And if you try to solve that with tax increases, think about what's going to happen. Here's the trajectory. Say this is your arch here. You raise taxes because you're spending more every year. Every single year you're going to have to go back and raise taxes because your trajectory is heading towards the mountain. We need to flatten the trajectory so we get our spending under control. And once we've done that, then I think you'll see the space open up for more private entrepreneurial and for jobs. So that's why, if you're wondering why is it, when you look at the 20th Congressional District, we're not a district made up of millionaires. I get that. I mean, I really do. I get that. But my point is this. I have studied this, and we have got to get the spending under control, and that's why I think the caps do that for us. The caps will, over time, wean us off that very high spending. We'll go from over 24% down to 22%, down, and over time, over the course of the decade, we go back down below 20%. Now, in our version of cut, cap, and balance right now, we go back to under 20% in about year 6 or 7. So, when people say to me, well, you're just dogmatic and you're not willing to negotiate, that's not true. That's not actually true. I believe in the framework of cut, cap, and balance because it solves the problem. But there's room to negotiate within cut, cap, and balance. If the opposing party doesn't like our version of cut, cap, and balance, they ought to counteroffer within that construct. Why the construct? Because the construct solves the problem. So if they want us to go to 19.9 at year 10, they ought to put it on paper and vote for it and send it back to us. That doesn't mean we're going to accept it. But that's how you do negotiations. That's how you actually do meaningful negotiations back and forth. See, what's happened is we've gotten into a bad habit here. The House passes the bill that we need, and then nothing gets done on the Senate. And then we negotiate based on our bill, and we come to a final solution. And then the opposition basically criticizes us for our first bill. And, you know, I understand why they don't want to vote for a bill, because they don't want to be held accountable. I've had debate with some of you. We've talked about why is it that the last Congress didn't have a budget? Is it because they were incompetent? I actually don't think so. I don't think that they didn't have a budget because they were incompetent. I think they didn't have a budget because they didn't want to stand behind the decisions. They didn't want to go back to their constituents and say, I got bad news for you, we're spending too much. They didn't want to do that, so they chose not to have a budget. We got sworn in January, and the first thing we did is we had to clean up that from the last Congress. And so, did I get criticized for voting for cuts? You know I did. You know I did. Does that mean I'm a bad person? Oh, heck no. We're doing this because that's what you sent me there to do. We voted for those cuts because we've got to balance the budget. And by the way, we have children here today. Is it right? They don't even get to vote, and we're spending with their money. That's just not right. So what we've got to do is hang strong. And I say cut, cap, what about the balance? The balance is so that when we solve this problem, and we will solve this problem, that the next generation doesn't end up in this very same spot. Because you know what? You've heard me say this before, both parties contributing to the mess we're in right now. And I want to put that balanced budget in place so that we never end up back here again. Now we've got a very stringent balanced budget amendment in our bill. Does that mean we're not open to, look, the 1995 version was different. And if the Senate likes that version better, they want to put it on paper and vote on it and send it back to us for consideration. And we can negotiate on that. But we need a balanced budget amendment. We need a balanced budget amendment because why? It's the same thing that we do, right? I mean, regardless of where we stand in life,